Good morning, everyone. Daniel Lee, he's the executive director from Levi Strauss Foundation, and boy, does he have a story to tell you guys about. He is advancing pioneer social change in the areas of HIV, AIDS, and worker rights and well-being, asset building, and social justice in communities that are touched by Levi Strauss Company and their business. During his tenure, the foundation's launched Pioneers in Justice, which equips next-generation civil rights leaders in San Francisco to amplify impact through the power of technology and networks. He serves on several boards, including the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy and funders concerned about AIDS, as well as advisory councils, including the Global Fund for Women and Horizons Foundation. He's got an incredible presentation, and then we're going to chat with him after. Remember, you can submit your questions online for him as well. So without further ado, Daniel.
Thank you. Thanks. Good morning. Oh, that was so tepid. Good morning. And let me say, Rena, first of all, the real Janet Jackson is right here with the ear microphone. You ought to switch over, yeah? I'm really happy to be here and excited to be at this MCON space. And many thanks to the folks at Achieve and the Case Foundation for creating a really invigorating space. So I'm here today to tell three stories. The story of a founder, the story of a company, and finally, the story of social pioneers who along the way were inspired and even supported. I hope you'll see how each of these stories emanates from each other, how they interrelate and mutually reinforce one another, and together speak to a distinctive spirit and a point of view that guides our millennial engagement, which is really pivotal at Levi Strauss & Company. So let's dive in. I'm a student of history, so let's start with the story of a founder. Here we have our dear Levi Strauss. Levi Strauss was an immigrant who actually escaped religious persecution in Bavaria, Germany. He initially settled, of course, hoping for a better life in New York City. But upon hearing about the promise of the California gold rush, and that as that fever was raging, it was at age 24, which is really millennial age, he moved to San Francisco. Now, we all know that during the gold rush, he didn't make his fortune panning for silver, panning for gold. He started a dry goods company, primarily selling cloth to tailors. He named that company Levi Strauss & Co. Okay, you know the movie From Coco to Chanel? What about this transformation from this person called Levi's to this global phenomena called Levi's? It all started, it all started with these guys. These are miners toiling in the foothills of California. They had a problem. In short, their pants kept ripping, right? No one likes that when it happens. They would carry ore samples in their back pockets as they trekked down the mountain to the assayer's office, and along the way, their pockets would burst from the pressure, okay? Now, along with this came an opportunity, and Levi Strauss partnered with a tailor named Jacob Davis on an innovation that they designed and they brought to market. Joys of technology. Oops. Here we have it. This innovation was a rivet sewn into the points of strain on the pants, making what was a point of weakness a point of strength and great durability. The riveted overalls were co-patented by Jacob Davis and Levi Strauss on May 20, 1873. And you'll see the patch, which is enlarged here, which actually depicts two horses trying to pull apart a pair of Levi's. Because of these rivets, they were famed for their durability and hence sustainability. And we might actually call this the first example of green marketing, of green message or cause-related marketing. This set in motion a 100-plus year legacy of commercial success. We all know that there are hundreds of denim brands today, but Levi's still remains the original. And as some of you may recall, Time magazine actually called Levi's the fashion item of the 20th century. And before we leave the story of our founder, let me say one thing that's really critical to his legacy. On the day of his death, the San Francisco newspaper, the headline read, "Levi Strauss, merchant and philanthropist, dies peacefully in his home." He deserved to die peacefully. But it's striking that he was called out not only as a merchant, but as a philanthropist. And he was renowned for giving back in the San Francisco Bay Area. Shortly after starting his business, he gave a donation to a local orphanage. And it's remarkable that our employees are still volunteering there. It's called the Edgewood Center. And that was a donation of about $100 at the time. And he maintained a relationship with that orphanage. He also endowed 35 scholarships at the University of California, Berkeley, around the turn of the century. And half of these were designated for women, which is really remarkable at the time. So we now pivot to the story of a company. That same pioneer spirit that Levi Strauss kindled is very much woven into the fabric of Levi Strauss & Company. Let's see if I can get this clicker to work. Yes. I'm going to share with you a quote that seems quite progressive and forward-looking, even by today's standards. Each of us has the capacity to make business not only a source of economic wealth, but also a source for social and economic justice. Okay, that sounds terrific as a statement, as a platform for corporate responsibility today. But let's reflect that this was spoken by Walter Haas Jr., who is a fourth-generation descendant of Levi Strauss when he was CEO in 1960s, more than 50 years ago at a meeting of business leaders. Now, guided by leaders like Levi Strauss and Walter Haas Jr., today Levi Strauss & Company is guided by 4 values. And the first question I wanted to really pose is, how do we think about the value of values in terms of millennial engagement, and also in terms of inspiring people to act? These values guide everything that we do as a company, both in the marketplace and far beyond. Originality, empathy, integrity, and courage. If you look at these values and reflect on them, originality, you're not afraid to be first. In fact, we're actually driven to be. Empathy, walking in other people's shoes, and never being afraid to look at those who are most marginalized. Integrity means standing up for the right thing, when it's proven, even when it's unpopular. And courage means going where others fear to tread. Now, let me give you a few examples of what this has looked like in our history. Here is a picture on the left of a factory in Virginia in the 1950s. You'll notice in that picture that it was integrated, and our factories were integrated long before the Civil Rights Act of 1964 mandated this by law. And this was a decision by family business leaders at the time. If you look to the picture on the right, in 1991, in the height of the trend, there were tectonic plates in the apparel industry towards outsourcing and contracted supply chains around the globe. Levi Strauss & Company was the first company in 1991 to create and insist on a code of conduct. We call it our terms of engagement, with labor, social, and environmental standards that all of our contracted partners are required to follow. Folks thought we were nutso at the time and that we would lose out on price, but it was the right thing to do. And it actually became a code that launched hundreds of other codes, according to Alan Kramer of Business for Social Responsibility, and became the industry standard. We have other efforts that we're trying to raise the bar, and perhaps we can talk about that later with Rena. HIV and AIDS. Even before it had a name in 1982, it was a mysterious but deadly disease that afflicted our employee population. Levi Strauss & Company was the first company to respond with employee education, the first corporate foundation to give a donation in the fight against HIV and AIDS. And I'm very proud to be part of the Levi Strauss Foundation. 33 years later, we're still in the fight against HIV and AIDS, which is a huge issue, particularly among youth and millennials, and in many of our emerging markets. $60 million later, and 33 years later, we've donated $60 million, and we're now focusing on the human rights response to the epidemic. You like my t-shirt? Thanks. This is part of a collection by the Levi's brand. Let me turn around. And it commemorates 30 years of 30 years of LGBT connection. Levi Strauss & Company, this wasn't sort of a flash-in-the-pan type of commitment. It was the first company back in 1992 to provide domestic partner benefits to same-sex couples. It was the first company to sign on to an amicus brief in 2007 to the California Supreme Court, talking about the economic benefits of same-sex couples. We hope that there may even be a decision today or in the coming days for marriage equality. Levi Strauss is now among 300+ companies that have signed on to a brief to the Supreme Court talking about the disadvantages of a fractured legal landscape with no uniform rule on marriage. We haven't been afraid along the way to stand in the face of controversy, and we know that taking our stands creates tension. In 1991, we made a stand that was then unpopular to discontinue matching gifts to the Boy Scouts of America. The reason, their policy around participation violated our discrimination policy on the basis of sexual orientation and religious belief. We know this has created tension, but this tension has made us stronger. So along the way, by living these values, we've seen company leaders, employees, and the family line put it all on the line: the company, its reputation, and its voice. And along the way, we've shifted how others think and believe about things. We've raised the bar in our industry, and we've taken many stands for civil rights and social justice. It's also important, another part of the story is really critical, are who are the people who are wearing Levi's? These are iconic photos from the Freedom Summer of 1964, where youth activists of all colors and races came to the state of Mississippi, and their goal was to register as many African-American voters as possible. Many of you have seen this image of denim-clad youth taking down the first bricks of the Berlin Wall. It's fascinating to see how people throughout history have been living in their Levi's, and they stood at the forefront of social and cultural change. And we believe as a company that's something we have to live up to. Bob Haas, our former CEO, has called Levi's the embodiment of the energy and events of our time. Okay, now let's turn to the third set of stories. Now we believe that this whole tradition, this pioneering spirit, guides us not only to do pioneering acts, but actively to support pioneers in our midst. Now, as many of you know, San Francisco is a cradle of innovation. It gets a lot of press for being the cradle of innovation and technology, right? And of course, the uniform of progress in the tech field is a pair of Levi's and a hoodie, right? But it's also renowned for being iconic in the social justice sector. And through this initiative called Pioneers in Justice, and you can go to our website for more on this, for a book-length case study. Our aim was to support, really with this vision of equipping pioneers for a modern frontier and the social pioneers in our midst. We are working over a 5-year period with the leaders of 5 bedrock civil rights organizations in the San Francisco Bay Area as they attempt to take organizations that are 40 to 60 years old and take them, if you will, to a 2.0 space. We asked them what they needed to really drive their change agendas, and they live with a sense of urgency, recognizing that if they simply copy-pasted the same strategies that were passed on to them, they would fall short of making justice really, and making justice translate, in particular to the millennial generation. So we asked them what they needed, and it was 2 things. Number 1, connection with technology and the new tools of the day. And secondly, fundamentally, radically new forms of collaboration. So we supported them along this way. So in the time that follows, I'd like to share a few sort of tidbits, a few nuggets of insight that have come from these bedrock civil rights organizations and their millennial engagement, okay? Number 1, and bear in mind, these are all Gen X leaders that have taken the helm. So this is a call out for the Gen X folks, and I'm very firmly Gen X. Number 1, it's not useful to otherize, to make assumptions, or explain away millennial behaviors. Actively create a network of millennials. Hire them, right? Ask for their views. Always ask directly for their views and regard them as an asset. There's no substitute for direct engagement. That's kind of a bit of a no-brainer. And number 2, it's even more of a no-brainer, that technology and social media matter to millennials. But let me add a bit of a wrinkle to that. Social media can be an incredibly powerful tool for identifying and distilling issues that matter in the justice sphere, and it does so with breathtaking efficiency. Third, social media and technology are critical, but they are not the whole shebang. In short, there is no substitute for tried and true ground strategies that have been the lifeblood of social movements. These ground strategies may include community organization, community mobilization, protests, changing the hearts and minds of key stakeholders, changing the minds of citizens. It is these things that have been the lifeblood of movements. And as we'll see in an example I'll provide here, social media can provide a lot of leverage here, but it's not the whole shebang. And finally, these civil rights leaders are recognizing that millennials are leading the way in social movements. And let me give you and close here with a very powerful story here. Many of you know the Transamerica building in San Francisco. If you look up, it's the most famous building there. In its shadow, it's lesser known, is the Department of Homeland Security Detention and Removal Office. Now, they're a group of 60 activists from a group called Aspire, and almost all of these were Latino and Asian undocumented youth who staged a dramatic protest blocking this bus. And inside are shackled individuals awaiting deportation. The Asian Law Caucus, one of the pioneers in justice, which is called Asian Americans Advancing Justice, the Asian Law Caucus, recognized that even as a 43-year-old organization, they had a vital role to play in supporting these youth organizers. And the Aspire group was actually seeded out of the Asian Law Caucus. They recognized their role would be really additive, that they could shine the spotlight on their courageous acts. By setting up a live stream, it actually, and promoting this widely through their channels, it resulted in widespread both print, TV, and radio coverage. But it also one staff member posted this photo on Instagram, and it actually went viral by being taken up by a national immigrant rights campaign. So the key takeaway I want to put here is what is really powerful about this image is the power of these folks putting their liberty, their lives, and their security on the line. And if you notice, they carried banners, they chanted slogans like undocumented, unafraid. And in many ways, if you look at this image, it harkens back in very powerful ways to those iconic social movements of the 1960s. Now, Social Justice 2.0 is about combining real offline activism with the power of people putting their bodies on the line, and that truth of their putting their bodies on the line, with online broadcasting, which really helped provide leverage, indeed, projecting this truth to a global stage. And it'll be really exciting to see as we progress, to see how Social Justice 2.0, which combines these aspects of online and offline and real human courage, what that can bring to fruition. So we've gone on a 160-year journey here. We've seen how one innovation led to the creation of the blue jeans, and how many people have stood in that pioneering spirit at the forefront of social and cultural change. The question I want to leave with again is, how can all of us, whether nonprofits, business, social entrepreneur leaders, equip pioneers for a modern frontier? This pioneering spirit has really served us well for the last 160 years, and we really hope that it will allow us to inspire other pioneers along the way for the next 160 years. Thanks.
That was great. That was great. Who knew about your jeans, huh? I had no idea about the efforts that they're doing to really help the community. But these are really progressive social issues. It's not the softer, easier things that a lot of companies. Deportation, immigration, people have very strong feelings about this. Did Levi's ever push back and say, oh, I don't know about this one, Daniel?
Well, the reason we're supporting the pioneers in justice, we didn't want to do this sort of ring fencing. We're gonna look at LGBT rights, but we're not gonna look at immigration, criminal justice reform, looking at police acts. What we're focused on is social justice, and we wanted to support those pioneers that were doing it the best. And our job is to equip them to be at their best. And when the issues and the events arise, we see that people really step up. And it was their role, as they saw as an organization, to live stream their acts. They actually brought their lawyers there too to inform them of their rights, because it really escalated where they said, if you don't leave, you're going to get arrested. And they also gave them ongoing training on facing the media so they can talk to people like you.
That's amazing to me, though, that there's this generation, millennials, who are so well-versed and aggressive about getting there in a way that generations before them just didn't savvy enough.
I was stopped in my tracks. I don't know how many of you have met Dreamer activists. And these are folks who are undocumented, brought to this country, and have gone through K-12 education. And these are folks that are among the most fearless that I've met. And I came of age And I think there's actually a golden decade of activism. It's often 25 to 35. And you see people who are wearing Levi's often making social and cultural change at that space. I came of age in the HIV/AIDS movement. And I felt that everyone in my generation actually simply had to get involved. And when I met these folks who were putting their lives on the line, who were so clear, so connected to their families, so connected to this country, I was like, you remind me of that fervor, of that courage, and it woke me up inside.
You're so right about the AIDS, HIV movement, especially in the 80s. I mean, it might sound a little trite, but you remember that image of Princess Diana where nobody would come near some of these people, and the fact that she really helped break down a barrier for people across the world with that one image.
Yes.
And people realized you can't just sit back anymore. This is very important. I want to take a question here from online. How do you engage employees in your social causes?
You know, it's interesting because employees have often been the ones who've been out there pioneering on the issues of our day. Yeah. Let me tell you about I mentioned the first response to HIV and AIDS in 1982. It was then not even called HIV, but it was a mysterious but deadly disease hitting pockets of gay men in San Francisco and New York, and that included our employee population. And they came to our company leadership and said, hey, this is affecting our community. Can we hand out leaflets? And it went up the flagpole to Bob Haas, who eventually became the CEO. And their response was, they did not waver. We will not only allow you, but we will join you. And they knew that these employees would stand at the brunt of homophobic stigma. And more people took those flyers at the time. And because those employees created a groundswell, you know, Bob Haas was inspired as a leader to be a champion for HIV and AIDS. Would talk to other business leaders. They would say, what are the issues facing us? And he would say, AIDS. And the first conference on HIV happened at Levi Strauss & Company, and we're actually now providing prevention, treatment, and care globally. So when you care about an issue, we look to our employees for that initial seed, for that spirit.
And what a difference the people at the bottom of the mountain can make to move the people at the top of the mountain to do something about it.
It's interesting. I mean, I actually came as a human rights advocate before coming to Levi Strauss, and it was a grantee of the organization. And when I came aboard, you know, the marching orders I got from our board president at the time was, and that was Bob Haas, who was an iconic, you know, business leader. He said, don't get comfortable here. Remember that change always comes from the margins, and that's where you came from.
Change always comes from the margins.
Change comes from the margins,
powerful.
Yeah. And if this were a music metaphor, you know, I'd really prefer jazz over a symphony. So I think the vision of the pioneers of, I call it putting kink in collaboration, really like taking this idea of unlikely allies and making that a calling and making that a new way of operating. That's what I'm seeing among millennials, and that's folks who are Gen X realizing we need to get with the program and join this type of new ways of moving.
Well, since you've been so candid about everything, we want to ask you, has there ever been a time in the company's history when you took a stand on a social issue and the company regretted it?
That's a good question. You know, I'll tell you, when the decision to discontinue funding to the Boy Scouts, which is, you know, as motherhood and apple pie as any organization I can think of, it's respected, deeply respected, we receive buckets of hate mail.
And we should say, just to remind everybody, why there was a decision about the Boy Scouts.
It was because they had a discriminatory policy on the basis of sexual orientation and religion. That was discriminatory, and that violated our policy. So we didn't allow matching gifts. Got tons of hate mail. It was actually on the front page of the New York Times. But you know, we know that as a company that if we say later or maybe, that often means never in justice. And that having a company and leaders that are willing to put it on the line and cut against the grain, we're going to see, I hope, a very favorable Supreme Court ruling. But we knew 30 years ago it was the right thing to do, and we stand behind that. But there's going to be further work to do afterwards, and you know, we're going to be there.
So of all of the social change you've helped to foster, Daniel, what would you say is the one lesson you've learned that you'd like to pass on to people who are trying to make a difference in big corporations?
I think that, you know, I actually went to divinity school.
Did
and
you really?
Yeah, you would never guess. But it's you know, I really cared about how values are inflected in institutions, how they're nourished, how they're created. I care about origins, you know, and how they're expressed. And what drove me, I never thought I would work for a company. I would have probably looked in the crystal ball in divinity school and looked in the future and said, you're at a corporate foundation, and said, ooh. But it was the values of the company and the fact that it was institutionalized with originality, empathy, integrity, and courage. We fund things like syringe access. We were the first company to fund syringe access because it's the right thing to do in the fight against HIV and AIDS. But if you have integrity as your value, it means you'll stand up for things that are proven, even if they're unpopular. So I would say for millennials out there, think about the value of values, and wherever you are in a company or a nonprofit, if your organization does not have values already, it's a tremendous opportunity to start those conversations. They ought to start from the grassroots. They also can start from leadership positions, and they meet somewhere in between. But the value of values can mean that you stand on those things, and with those, you can move mountains and be very courageous.
It's a powerful message, Daniel. On that note, I do have to ask you one superficial question. We're out of time very quickly. Are these Levi's?
Of course they're Levi's. And I just want to say, and this is one moment I want to say that the millennial generation is the most diverse to ever come across the face of this humanity. And to be interviewed by you, Rena, it's tremendous. As an Asian Pacific Islander, to make it on Good Morning America, this is usually your bedtime, because they usually record at 1:30 a.m. This is one of the great honors that I have. And
you were so sweet.
Rena is really a first mover in a wave of cultural change in every sector. So thank you.
Thank you. You said backstage you were going to make me cry. You're very close to it.
Super clap. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
It's really moving. You really had some great, powerful things.